Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. I'm so excited to be here today. We have another guest speaker. And to begin, I am Kim.
And I'm Tia.
And we have Deb Blum with us today. And as always, we begin our episodes with a quote. So I'm going to start with the quote, and then Tia will let you know what we're going to talk about today. And you'll get a little hint of what we're going to talk about through the quote. So the quote is, "The people who trigger us to feel negative emotions are the messengers. They are messengers for the unhealed parts of our being." And that is by Teal Swan. So Tia, do you want to let everyone know what we are going to talk about today?
Yeah, I it kind of gave it away. We're talking about triggers today with the amazing Deb Blum. And before we get into our topic of conversation, Deb, why don't you introduce yourselves and let our listeners know a little bit about you?
Great. It's so great to be here. I'm so excited. I've been so looking forward to this day. So I am a self-love and authenticity coach. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking that for I've been working with women, mostly moms, for over a decade doing this work. But for the first 9 years, I never knew what to say that I did. I was always like, well, I'm an empowerment coach and I'm a life coach. And, I'm certified as a health coach, a parent coach, and a life coach. So I was like, oh, those things, but it never really fully got it. And then I was looking back and I saw over and over again, even back when no one was talking about self love, I was writing things about self love. And I even remember I asked a yoga teacher friend of mine if she would do a workshop with me on self love, and she was like, "What? Like, what? Nobody knows what self love is." And that was in, I think that was probably 2014.
Mm.
And so when I think about what I do with people, I mainly help. I mean, really, it's like all of the stuff that you're talking about here. I help them to understand what the masks are that they're wearing that keep them from really living their true lives. And I don't do it from like this epic place. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, live your this and like follow an epic path or whatever. It's not like that. Like, I work with moms who are like, they just want to stop being in survival mode. They want to feel more inner peace. They want to feel the sense of that they're confident and they feel good about themselves, because most of the women that I work with, they do way too much and never feel like they're good enough. It's like, that's like the pattern, right? And they have like this harsh inner critic, and they beat themselves up, and they just always feel this sense of pressure.
Mm.
So I help them to look at the masks, look at the ways that we all know that the masks are there, like kind of right. It's because we think we're not good enough as we are, or that we're not, or that there are parts of us that like other people would dislike. So it's this sense that we are in many ways just constantly giving ourselves a message that we're not lovable.
Mm.
Every time we put on a mask, we're saying like, I have to wear this mask because you, the real you, don't show that part.
Right.
So I can, and it requires a lot of courage though, because it's easy to tell somebody like, love yourself, take off your mask or whatever, but it's not like that, right? This is like our whole life. We spend the first, decade to 2 decades of our life putting on all these masks, and then we spend the rest of our life trying to, remove them gently and courageously to show up fully.
Mm.
And so I happen to use triggers a lot for my entry point. So that's part of the reason why I thought triggers would be so fun to talk about.
Oh, definitely, because there's so much wisdom in all those triggers, right?
Yeah.
So we'll start off just with a quick question, and then we're just going to let the conversation go where it is supposed to go today, because that's what all three of us do, right? It's not just Kim and I. I know that that's what you encourage as well, as conversation and exploring and curiosity. So you mentioned self-love, and I just love that you were talking about self-love before people were even aware of what that is, because it's innately within us. We just didn't know that. So how are triggers a way to help us love ourselves more? Like why are triggers that entry point for the work that you do?
Well, so I want to say one thing about it, a little like pre-thing, which is I was listening to Janet Philbin on your show, and such a great episode. I loved it. And she uses pain as a portal. And for me, I was numb.
Mm-hmm.
I was numb. So I didn't actually feel a lot of pain when I started doing my healing work. I felt blame. I felt criticism. I felt triggered and angry. And so of course, was there pain there? Well, no question, but it didn't feel like I didn't feel like I wasn't crying. I wouldn't say you hurt my feelings. I would never have said those words. I was more projecting out anger, blame, criticism, judgment. And some people feel it deeply within. I definitely turned it out to the world. So what happened for me was that I did use all of those pieces as my entry points. And what I discovered was that for me, it was the way that I accessed the pain. And what I've come to see is that, and it's not 100% across the board. Of course, there are always exceptions to this, but for the most part, when we get triggered, there is some part of us that, well, first of all, what it is we get this triggered feeling. Let's just say, I mean, and it can be anything, right? So I tended to be a little more of a fight and a people pleaser, which is fawn. Okay. So I had fight and fawn. Those are my two major things I did. But you can also flee and you can freeze. And I had freeze in other ways of my life that were a little more subtle and took longer to discover. But initially I was like a big fight, and I was fight with a lot of people and fawn with women. Mm-hmm. So I would get this trigger, and I had to, then I would take, so in the moment's one thing. Okay. But let's just say that's one part of it. The second part was post trigger, right? Like the inquiry that we do. And this is where I would do a tremendous amount of journaling. And like Janet, journaling has been like, for me, the way in. Mm-hmm. Then what I started to realize is there was a pattern I could go through with it. I could see that like, oh, well, so I'm feeling triggered. And so I could vent about my trigger, but then I would go in and be like, okay, like, so what are my perceptions? What are my stories? What are the things I'm actually saying right now? And then I could get even further and go, what are my needs? What am I feeling? Mm-hmm. What do I feel in my body? What are my like feelings that I'm like calling out of my mind? And each layer, ultimately what I got to was that there was some part of me that I was like rejecting, or some part of me that I was in conflict with, or some part of me that was hurting. And because we so often reject and resist pain, we often reject and resist our wounding, and we don't want to go there. So I started to just discover, wow, this is almost always revealing a part of me that wants to be loved and held. And like, we talk about like, we need to heal our feelings. I've come to really see that the healing is a holding. It's more like, I just need to meet them. I need to say, and so, okay, but so I go a step further with it, which is, and I know that, we've talked about this before, Tia, about shadows, which is I even think sometimes I can be really quick with things now. Like I can be in judgment, as an example, maybe not even that triggered, but I can within a minute be like, oh, look at me. Like, oh, I'm judging my little neediness, like my needy part of me. Like, oh, like and so I noticed, like, I'm judging I was giving you an example before of a family member that I was like, oh, he's a little bit like seeking, pity for, he wants like compassion. Well, I know that's a part of me that I am not fully in a good relationship with. So, but I'm not harsh. Like I look at this as a life journey. Mm-hmm. I'm not judgmental of myself anymore. I'm like, oh, I'm so sweet. Like that tender little part of me. And I'm very gentle about it now. And it's not a big deal. And I don't think we need to get to the place where we destigmatize all this stuff and stop thinking that there's something that's broken in us because we feel this, because it's actually awesome. It's like, holy crap, we have this amazing tool we can use.
Right. I love that you share that, because I needed to hear that. Number one, I needed a dose of that right now. Number two, I was telling Tia before we started recording is that I've had so much on my plate lately with different things going on with family members, my elderly uncle, my father, my kids, just overwhelmed, right? And I've been saying the critical voice back here is like, Jesus, Kim, like, come on, you should know better. You do the podcast, you know all this stuff, you're on this path. Why are you so triggered? Why are you reacting with such, like, the way you are? Like, that's the voice, right? That I can hear. And so I'm in resistance to what's happening. I'm resisting the pain. And I'm saying, no, it shouldn't be. And now it's just creating more suffering for myself. And it's the second arrow. And now and there's even more judgment, like, oh my, I'm such a basket case right now. Whereas what you're saying is that the process, the way is when you notice that is to stop and to just pause and go in and be gentle. Right. And that's often what Tara Brach teaches with her RAIN technique is when you notice something, you recognize that you're having something going on, you allow it to be there, you investigate, which I heard you say, you go in, you go underneath. What does this part of me really want and really need? And it's often our inner child that just needs to be held and hear, it's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. All is well. All is good. And that becomes the end, the nurturing of RAIN is to hold yourself in space. But we're not taught that, right? We're not taught that. We're taught when we're little that when we have big feelings, big emotions, or we are triggered, that whole cliche or saying of be seen and not heard, right? Or our caregivers would get very either upset with us for our big feelings and emotions, or they just ignored altogether. Nonetheless, we just never learned how to go in and nurture that part of ourselves. Because in the end, who really cares? Does it really matter in the big scheme of life? These judgments that we put on ourselves, these criticisms, the pressure, all this stuff that we are so triggered about. I'll use your word. I was going to say a tizzy. I'm in a tizzy, but I'm really being triggered. It just is not that important. How important is it? It's more important that I have a relationship with myself and I love myself.
Yeah. Well, and I would make the argument that it's a blessing that you're being triggered, and even though I know in the moment it doesn't feel like it, and it is, I can see now how it's pain from the past, but I always just looked at it as more like what you're saying. It's like overwhelm. And I didn't feel emotionally, I didn't feel emotional in the sense of sad or those feelings. I felt, more kind of frustrated, irritation, agitation. But like, yeah. And by the way, I would even go as far with our parents and caregivers and teachers and stuff. They tended to literally get triggered by our triggers,
Oh,
and so
yes.
they taught us basically, they were afraid. They were so afraid of us and our big emotions. Yeah. And I also think that we're afraid of our big emotions, and I'm still afraid of my big emotions. I'm not going to deny that, like, there are times when I'm in resistance and I don't want to go there either. We all are. But again, it comes back to over and over again. It's like, how can you be in it, but not be so, I feel like there's another layer of pressure we have right now, which is a layer of pressure that you're supposed to be healing and you're supposed to do it a certain way and it's supposed to look a certain
definitely.
way. And you're always supposed to be healing. And
Right.
you can't ever just say, like, why isn't it okay? Like, for you, I'm just going to give you the invitation to say, Kim, like, what if it's okay to just be a little bit in it right now, not really know what it's here to teach you yet.
Yeah.
And to just say, and the gentleness I feel like is being called for you, that I hear, is more just being like, okay with not being okay with it being overwhelming, okay with that there's just a little too much right now. And to be like, yeah, and at some point I might understand that this is going to reveal something to me, but right now,
Yeah.
I'm doing everything I can. I'm hanging on. And life isn't easy.
Yeah.
It can be easy, but it's not always easy.
Absolutely. And what I also do hear and feel what you said in the very beginning when you started talking about the masks, how the triggers can show us our masks. I 100% hear my perfection. I'm not even going to own it by saying I'm taking that word out of the equation because I'm not owning it. The perfection mask that I carry at times, that's what I'm hearing, because there's a should in my vocabulary. And I said it already, and I'll repeat it again. You should be handling this differently. You should be handling all of this overwhelm with such ease and grace. Because what? Because you're on this path, because you have been healing for so long. You shouldn't be falling apart. You shouldn't be a basket case. All those shoulds is a key indicator that there's perfectionism going on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, good catch.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's one of my little triggers going on. But it is an invitation, as you said, it's an invitation to go inward and to just allow acceptance. And that's so hard.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Tia, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to add what you were talking about, because I think it's a really important piece that does get glossed over a lot. Like, you go within, you need to find what's going on within you. But sometimes what we need most is to just sit in the muck for a little bit.
Yeah.
There's so much fear of especially when you're on this path, like, I got to figure it out. I need to go in. There's something in there. What's the shadow? What's this? What's that? And sometimes our nervous system, our body, our mind, and our spirit just need a break. And so allowing that wallowing in the muck, just being there, is also extremely beneficial. And I think we forget that sometimes. I mean, I had a client recently who's in that space and she just wants to get out. And I'm just like, how about you just sit there for a little bit? Because right now your energy is searching. When you're in that searching for the answer energy, you're not open to receiving. And so sometimes sitting in the muck allows the receiving part of our space to open up, instead of the doing, finding, which creates another block. And then our masks and our self-shame and our negativity towards ourself just gets embedded in deeper. And so that muck place is foreign, but it's actually a beautiful place to be when we allow it.
It can be freeing to be there,
Yes.
because when we don't have the pressure that we should be somewhere else, because that's really what we're always trying to do, is we're like, we should be further along, or we should be more evolved. We should know how to handle this situation. And it's like, but maybe not. And, I even tell people who can't be in the muck for too long, I even say to them, listen, if you can be in the muck for 1 minute today, that's it. Like, that's okay too.
Exactly.
And, coping strategies actually are wise, right? Like, coping strategies aren't there they're not random. They're useful. Yep. And often I like, I'm sure that you do too. Like, the first step I encourage people to do is just notice your coping strategy. Like, I don't care, get triggered, do all that stuff. Like, I'm not stopping you from being triggered in the beginning. Like, triggering is actually useful. It's very good information. And so I free up that space to say, like, it's okay. Now, is it nice for us to work on our reactivity? Yeah, but I kind of feel like that stuff starts to happen. I'd rather get to the root cause of why I'm being triggered than to try to willfully stop a person from reacting. Yeah, it's good. Put some duct tape over your mouth sometimes, walk away. Those are great things to do, but sometimes you can't, and then you have to unpack and repair. But I think that sometimes there's also this part of like guilt and judgment about using a coping strategy. Like, hello, like to say to somebody like that safety doesn't matter, like, yeah, safety is paramount and everyone is going to prioritize safety. And there's no shame in prioritizing safety. And sometimes a coping strategy is absolutely what's needed and called for. And to go to this place of like the only like evolved thing to do is to never use coping strategies. I mean, that's just, I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. And sometimes it takes a long time for my clients to stop using coping strategies. But when they become aware of it, it's a much better place to be. Like, oh yeah, I do notice myself kind of going stoic here. Like, why? oh, I need to. I don't think I could handle this situation if I didn't go stoic right now. Okay.
Exactly. And giving that permission is humongous because it releases the pressure. I mean, I personally, it's like if I'm feeling that overwhelm, like, you know what, I just need to unplug or do whatever, binge on some, and I'm not like a huge TV person, but there's times I'm like, I just need to disconnect. I want to think about any of this. I need to allow myself some space to just watch some stupid whatever, being mindful. I'm not going to watch a documentary. I'm not going to watch a self-help thing. I'm not going to read. I'm going to do something completely different to allow that space and giving that permission. And I think you brought up another great point too, is when don't react, don't do this, don't do this. You need to pause, you need to do that. Those are all amazing tools, and they can be used as something to bypass. It's a very effective tool to bypass. Like, I'm just going to do what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not going to look at that root cause. And so there's an important piece to recognize, because I see this a lot in people who they think they're healing, and there's nothing really to heal, right? It's just an integration. Like you said, it's a holding, but they're just skirting. It's a sneaky bypass.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I'm not reacting. Yeah, but are you numb inside? Are you even feeling? Are you connecting with that inner part of you? Or are you just, this is your new survival, is bypassing, so I don't have to touch these bits within me and look and be curious and inquire.
Absolutely. And I will say that there are people who I've watched do that. And there is this other thing that I see. I just want to, give me 1 second here. I know we're in the middle of this, but I want to just,
It's all good.
I want to make sure I turn something off that could potentially get us going here for, no, I'm good. I just didn't want it to get frozen. So I think that there are often people who go to that other extreme, and that is, and I often now I just bring attention to it. I say, I just want you to notice like you're doing that, but it's okay. It's okay, because I actually think you're learning some really good skills here, which is how to bite your tongue and all of that stuff, but we're not done with it.
Exactly.
That's not the end of the path. That's just,
exactly.
that's just, then that's your, because I don't know, one thing that I've learned now that I've done this for a decade is that I don't actually know what's right for another person.
100%.
I don't. All I know, all I can do is be the person who sees something a little differently than you do, and shifts your perspective, or looks from a different vantage point, or might be able to connect things that you can't connect. Because just like I have a coach, because I can't always do it for myself either.
Right.
And so I've come to see that it's like, if you're doing that, there's got to be wisdom in it. There's got to be wisdom. I don't know what the wisdom is, and I might not have gone that way, but you are. So let's figure that out. Like, let's understand why. And let's just remember that, because I even say spiritual bypass, it's totally fine as long as that's not your end. That's not the end,
Circle back.
Just, yeah. So because it's just, how do I know what someone else can tolerate in this situation? I just can't know that.
I love that you bring that up, because
too.
I think that's so important too, because yes, learn those tools and keep going, keep exploring. Yeah. And like you said, one person's way of healing it, or whatever, awakening, whatever words you want to use, fill in the blank for whoever is listening, is their way. And maybe they shift gears and they go another way. And it's not a linear process, and understanding that if that's the way for you, honor it. But just keep being curious, keep inquiring and recognizing, because all those tools are helpful in the long run. I mean, some people really have to stay in the mind part to understand the psychological piece. Other people go straight to spiritual, and then they forget about the mind piece. And so it's taking all those 4 levels of the form, the mind, the psychological, the spiritual, the transcendent, all of that. And it's over time, we start to integrate them all, but we can't do all of them at the same time.
Right.
It's not possible, except for maybe some rare, amazing human. And I say amazing, not in a judgment way, like is like a unicorn. Like, wow, you can do all 4 levels at the same time. That's incredible. It's not common. I've never seen that personally with anybody, but I know it's possible, because everything's possible. And I had a teacher once tell me, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before, at least in other talks I've done, I know I share it with my clients, is we learn in different, it's a process. You may notice it way long after the fact. Your trigger happened and you notice it the next day. Oh my gosh, I was triggered there. And I did X, Y, Z. And then it gets closer, and then you can notice it in the moment. And then you can notice it before it even happens over time. But that's with that trigger, with that person or that situation. That trigger transforms and mutates and gets a different flavor. And now all of a sudden it feels like you're starting over, but you're not starting over. And so remembering that things shift and change, and gets all those flavors of all those triggers are there to help us. I love that self-love.
Yeah. And, I remember, it's so funny to talk about that because it's so true. I got my therapist would say to us too, like, in the beginning, you could be months, you could get triggered and then not even notice. You could be stuck in a trigger for that long.
Yes.
I actually remember when I thought that it was my husband who was the problem in my life. And we were in marriage therapy. And it turned out that when I was in the midst of all this stuff with my husband, it's only in retrospect that we saw this, but I had been really triggered I had been bullied when I was in 10th grade. And my kids were young. They were in preschool and then elementary school when all this stuff started happening, that I didn't realize it, but I was being triggered by being around groups of women because this was a group of girls who had bullied me. And I didn't realize that I had been triggered. So in retrospect, I saw that I was triggered for a couple of years. I was in like a level of trigger. And and I would just define the trigger as like a time when my nervous system was at a heightened state and I was feeling a strong sense of fear and I was feeling almost like re-traumatized from the past. And so when I was able to go back and look at it, and see, I mean, that was a really long time. I find for most people, it's days, I think days to weeks is the most that people kind of stay stuck in a trigger. Though I will say, I think all of us are at some low level, like just at some level, our nervous systems are heightened. And that feels like everything is irritating and everything kind of does feel like it's poking at us. And we're sensitive to like little things happening all the time. And we could get these just like tiny little triggers. But I also learned that part that you talked about, Tia, where, over time you start to get it gets closer, the actual reaction and, or the stimulus and your reaction. There's like, you have more clarity over it. You can see it. You have a gap. And it doesn't also take as long to realize you were triggered. But what I think is really interesting, I remember when I first learned about this, and I didn't learn by someone teaching me, I learned by living it, going into my therapist and having this happen and kind of just realizing, wow, this is what happens to me. I get triggered, I get reactive, and then I lose it. And then I hurt people. And then I have to go back and repair this whole thing. And, but it became such a blessing for me because I started to notice, not only did I stop getting triggered as much, because that's part of it. And that is so helpful to not be triggered as much. But I also just found other areas of my life I was just more happy. I was more connected. I was more peaceful. And so I started to connect that the two actually weren't, it wasn't just to do work with your triggers so that you'll stop being triggered. That's just part of it.
Yes.
So ultimately what we're suffering from, in my opinion, what we're suffering from is mass self-abandonment. Where we're oriented to the outside. We want other people to meet our needs. We literally want other people to be more good than us. Or we like expect them, oh, well, you shouldn't be needy and you shouldn't be judgmental and you shouldn't be disrespectful, but we don't even hold ourselves accountable for that. We want everybody else to do it all right. And we are not looking inside. And we are, and of course there's the oneness element and all of that, but I just believe that it's just a beautiful gift that we're given, that we project onto other people so that we can see in other people that which we aren't able to see within us.
Yes.
And when I learned that, I remember going to my therapist and actually saying, like, I would always regret it. I haven't been triggered in a long time. I feel like I like, and then, oh my God, I'd get so slammed, the next day I guess I'm like, I was like, be careful what you ask
Exactly.
for. But I would get another layer because it wasn't like I was done.
No, we're never
It was
done.
just, I was like in a little bit of a pause and a little bit of a lull, but I invited it. I come in, and then each time I find another part, another aspect of self, another part of who I am. And I put it back and I fill a hole. Like I like to say to people, when we're little, what happens is like every time that someone tells us like, oh, and a lot of times it's just a misinterpretation anyway, but like, oh, you're so loud. You're so loud. I'm on a phone call. And then we think, oh no, I should be more quiet. So then we dim our light. And then what we do is we take out a piece of us. This is how I think of it. And then not only do we have an empty hole, we take that part and we also put it in a backpack. So we also carry the burden of it. So we literally feel weighted down by life as every time that we think we can't be that way or that's a bad thing. And we have a hole in our soul. So we both become burdened and we become a colander. And we become this thing that can't even hold like other people. We can't even receive love from others. We can't hold it. We just feel this emptiness. And we're always trying to fill our holes. And so I love triggers because they always show me another part. And I'm like, oh, another part. And I can put it back in, take it out of here. It's not as heavy anymore. Put it in here. I feel more whole. And that wholeness translates into inner peace, vibrancy, aliveness, vitality. It's life force. And so of course we feel better. So that's my take on what happens. And I think that's why I don't want to stigmatize it. Cause I'm like, oh my God, this is like, I think it's as designed.
Totally.
It's by design. We just didn't understand it in the past. And now we get it.
Right. I 100. Oh, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, I 100% agree because that is what I see with my clients all the time when I'm doing sessions is that, they ultimately in hypnosis go back to a time when they felt, felt the key word that you used, misinterpretation, right? So most of the time, 95% of the time, the parents, caregivers were doing the absolute best they could with what they had at the time. So it's no blame, no shame on our caregivers. However, the child misinterpreted that behavior as I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, felt abandoned. And so when I'm doing sessions with clients and they're feeling certain ways, it's taking them right back to the time when they were abandoned as a child. And consequently, as an adult, the reason they're coming with a presenting issue is because they are still abandoning themselves. And I just shared a prime example of how I did that to myself when with this overwhelm that I'm in, because you said sometimes triggers can be short and quick and sometimes they're longer. And I'm in this 4-month, really since I had COVID, of overwhelm trigger of, and in January, I did show up for myself really. And I shared that on the podcast and I was really good. And then there's been times over the last couple of months where it's just been escalating and I'm not showing up for myself. And I just shared it right now today on how I abandoned myself. And so it's 100%, what happened to us as children, like you said, the trigger in the backpack. And we need to show up for ourselves. Our adult self has to step in and has to nurture and comfort the child self so that you can then fill that hole within. And it's such an important, you said by design, it is such an important design to have, working through this.
Yeah. It's a gift, but it's hard. And
it is hard.
And in the beginning, for the first period of time until you actually can see the value that comes from it, it just feels like pain, and that's the problem. And because the trigger is actually a little easier, it's like a release valve, and it actually relieves you in some ways from feeling that the deeper pain, because we are externalizing it. Now, do we end up with damaged relationships often? Yes. Do we hurt people and we have to repair trust and we're embarrassed and we feel ashamed? Yes. And so that's often an incentive, right? My incentive was I was ruining my relationships. That was my incentive I was dealing with a lot of like inner restlessness and like a sense of dissatisfaction in my life, but I was also hurting people. And so that was a strong catalyst for me to prioritize this work. But ultimately, it did mean that I had to look at pain inside of me.
Right.
You know, and I had to be willing to, to like really hold myself, to listen to myself, to really go inward and no longer, like take the instant gratification, kind of the instant relief of either projecting out there or whether it was, the other ways I also soothed, whether it was eating or working too much, or I was always ideation. Like I would be going to ideation to avoid like and it looked like such a good coping strategy. Like people were like, oh, you're so full of good ideas. I'm like, yeah, it turns out that that's a coping strategy. Didn't know that, but that was my coping. And I still have to deal with that coping strategy, a busy mind with positive things. Like, I had good things going on. And it was like, that's still me avoiding.
Right.
Really tuning in.
So one of the things too that I'm hearing in our whole conversation, I think is this, what I'm feeling is balance, right? There's got to be some kind of balance, because when we are in the muck and if we stay there too long or just feel the pain you mentioned early on that you can re-traumatize. So we want to be careful of re-traumatizing. So how do we find that balance of tapping in, feeling the pain, not bypass, as we talked about, because we don't want to bypass either, and knowing when, okay, put the lid back on the pressure cooker. It's been too much. We've been with it too long. And it's okay now, like go into a coping strategy, because if you stay here too much longer, you don't want to re-traumatize yourself. Do you know what I'm trying to ask and say? Like that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it probably does depend on every individual, but I think that one thing I would first say is that cultivating self-trust is really important. So cultivating like when it's too much for me as an individual. I also think that, I don't know. I mean, in my opinion, I think one of the challenges that we have is that we also don't get taught how to fully feel feelings. And I'm no expert on this, believe me. Like this is my work, is learning how to fully feel my feelings. So there are a lot of people who are great at emoting. They're great. They cry easily, but no, and I don't cry easily. So I don't even really fully relate, I don't fully relate to it because it's not my natural go-to, but I know there are people who cry easily and they think that they're actually feeling their feelings, but often those are thought-generated feelings. They're like feeling sorry for another person because you're imagining what they're going through, or crying because of like they're like an overwhelm. And that's fine. And there's no judgment. Tears are actually incredibly healing. But there's another layer of healing that I'm trying to really understand better, which is the one where it's deeper. It's like, it's in the cells. I don't know. I mean, it's something that I think is, have you ever heard that they say that if you fully feel a feeling, it's only like a 90-second arc?
Yeah.
Right.
So I just yesterday, I'll share a little story with you. So I decided to reach out. Have you ever heard of Jeff Brown? He's a coach who wrote. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So for some reason, I decided to reach out to him and have a coaching session with him.
Oh, amazing.
I know. So it was really cool. And I got on the call with him and he was, as I kind of expected him to be, and was great. And at one point in the call, he says, he was asking me what I've done for work. And I told him I'd done somatic experiencing and, hypnotherapy and a few different things. And He's like, I don't know. I mean, that's such subtle work for you. I think you need something like you have this life force and this like power and passion. Like you need something to bring you through. It's like more like this, something else is coming through you and that wants to flow. And I was like, okay. And so he recommends I go see this woman. Her name's Lydia Becker. And he says, oh, I don't know whether she's doing remote calls or what's going on. And then so lo and behold, she's in the next town over from me. No joke.
What?
Wow.
Literally lives the next town from me. Okay. So, but it gets even better. So then I book it. I go to schedule it and I think, oh, I'm going to schedule it next week. And I'm like, no, I really want to schedule it the following week. And I forget what my reasons were, but I scheduled it for yesterday. So, okay. So, and now, as you know, in the meantime, my mother passed away.
Mm-hmm.
So I was having this fear that I was going to be like unable to feel. Because it's like a pattern of mine that I like, that I had numbness in the past and like, am I going to be that person who like someone dies and it's just not going to affect me much? And I don't know. So Sunday, I see that I have this on my calendar for the next day. My mom died on Sunday. Sunday, I see it's on the calendar. I'm like, I don't think I want to do that. I'm like, I mean, the last thing I need is another thing on my to-do list. I just don't want to. But I kept feeling this sense of like, no, just keep it on your calendar. So I'm seriously in resistance. Like, I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go up until literally the minute that I'm going. I don't really want to be here. I get in there and I sit down with her and I do get a little weepy telling her about my mom. She's like, oh, she invites me over. So now the idea is this breath work. I don't even know what I'm doing. I literally don't. I didn't even look up what she does. I just
just went with it.
I get in. She lays me down on a mattress, and she starts like rubbing my forehead and rubbing like in here, and she starts doing a little bit of her own moaning. Have you ever heard of like wailing? Like wailing circles, which is like for grief. It's like a way that I think it's more of like a Native American or something like cultural thing where they would bring people together and there'd be someone who came in to wail, to cry, to get people to grieve after someone dies. And it brought that up. Well, she was doing a little bit of that. No joke. I start sobbing, like almost convulsing. I felt like I for 30 minutes, I actually emoted in a way I've never, ever in my life have done. But what was fascinating and why I'm telling you the story is partially because I think there's hope for all of us, even people who feel that they don't, that they don't have access to those emotions that they want to have access to. And, you just have to kind of keep peeling back those layers. But I am telling you, it was about a 90-second arc for each time that I had and something. It was, I would go into it and I would almost be at a point where I don't think I can handle this anymore. And then it would come back down again. And it was about 90 seconds each time. Wow. So I know that we don't actually have to sit in. If it's when we get stuck, I think there's some way we get stuck. And I wish I could explain what it is, but I think we get stuck in like a thought pattern. And the thought pattern, and it's us going into the future, it's future catastrophizing. This is going to be awful. Oh my God, this is horrible. What did I do? What did I think? All these other things. And that gets us stuck in this place that is so horrible and painful. If we have someone that helps us to guide us into it in like the depths, I think it's actually not that long of a painful cycle. So I'm trying to grapple with it myself. Of like, what is it? Yeah. When do we get too stuck? When are we re-traumatizing ourselves? When are we actually going through and actually feeling it all the way through? But I do think that often it's just, we are stuck in a lot of thinking, and that thinking is causing us a lot of suffering. And that's part of the reason why we benefit from working with people one-on-one, I think, is that they can really help us to see where we're, really stuck and where we can kind of they can guide us out.
Yeah. And I think also with that, the experience you had, ones you have with your clients, ones I have with my clients, and being on the other end too of the receiving aspect, is having someone to bear witness is extremely powerful for healing.
Yep.
Because we can do all this journaling and all this inner work and understanding and doing all of that, but if we don't share it, I don't feel it moves through fully, because it's still staying inside, even if it's on paper, even if it's in other ways. But when we share our stories, our experiences, we ride that wave, and there are one other person, or you're in a group situation, who can hold that safe container.
Yeah.
I don't have words to describe it, but for me, it feels like it completes that cycle of like, okay, now that I can fully put that back inside. Where when we put it inside ourselves, I don't think, because we're meant for connection. This is how we have evolved. The whaling circles, all of these traditions. Yeah, you would have your, why can't I think of the name of it? When you go, your vision quest. That's individual that evening, but you come back into community to finish the process. So there's something to be said for community, for support, one-on-one, group, whatever it is, because we are not meant to heal alone. It's a solo journey, but together, which is what seals it.
Yeah, well, and really, if you think about it, it's also the other people in our lives that trigger us.
Right.
So it's a full circle. Like,
yes,
if we didn't have other people in our lives and we just lived kind of privately in our own little home or in an ashram or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
We don't ever even experience all the triggers.
Exactly.
And then on the other side, right, it's like coming together and feeling heard and seen, and also the seeing and hearing of others' stories. Because right, how many times are you in group and you're like, I thought I was the only one.
Mm.
I didn't even know that other people are going through that same thing.
And it may not be exactly the same, because it never is, but it's similar and touches that same point. I mean, that's why I know you lead circle groups as well, Deb, but when I hold that circle, when I have circles and create that circle safety space, when we share each other's stories and we hear, so we're receiving and giving. And when someone is sharing their experience, like you said, I'm not alone, and we're doing that work collectively. And that's what I say in my circles. I'm like, this may be your area where you're looking at and exploring each individually, but we're all healing together. So the work you're doing is healing that piece within me. And the work I'm doing is healing the place within everyone else in that circle. And that is the power of circle.
Yeah.
And group, we just did our True North. That's that power of holding that space. Because we can't just do this work alone, because we're not serving our community. We're not serving the world by holding it in and just doing it individually.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. Because it is such a collective element to this.
Yeah.
I do love
yeah,
to share it.
Can be. Oh yeah, it can be for sure. I love what you both said about that. And I just want to go back for a moment to what you were saying earlier, Deb, because I often am trying to figure out and grapple myself with the difference with the feelings, whether it is thought generated or whether it is in my nervous system. And sometimes I can catch when I'm on a thought train, and then I can notice if I'm feeling some feelings. So obviously in those moments, it's my thought train that's creating an emotion inside of me. But if I'm just like in a normal neutral space, and if I just drop into my body and just do a body scan, and if I can feel, whether it be in, my chest, my throat, or my stomach, like just squeezing, tightness, like that to me, or in my legs, that to me feels like that's pain, feelings that are trapped in my body and nervous system. I don't really know the answers either. I'm just trying to figure it out myself. And it's challenging to know, because if I don't want to be recreating more and more pain for myself if it's coming from the mind. And Tia and I have had this conversation so many times. Is it the mind that's creating the pain, or is there like true pain? Obviously, there are certain things in life, like the death of a loved one, a divorce, money issues, coronavirus, like those life situations obviously are going to create some kind of pain, and you're going to have some feelings about it. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the other stuff, the underlying pain, feelings, of fear, of shame, of guilt, is it stored in our bodies, or are we creating our own suffering?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think it's probably, just as you haven't come to the answer, I think it's both, and it's both, and it depends. And I will offer this one thing that I have definitely benefited from: movement. And, and so, because if the issues are stored in our tissues, and
Yeah.
especially if it's chronic, we keep on going back to the same places. So one of the things that I've just been recently learning about this, that people think that insomnia is often that it's stuff that we haven't processed through the day. And it can be for many reasons, but I've definitely suffered from insomnia. And one time I woke up years ago, and of course menopause and things like that don't help as well. But I woke up one night and I was never a dancer. I was never really those weren't really things for me. They've become part of my life, but I didn't used to feel comfortable with it. I was shy and uncomfortable being like dancing in front of other people. So I would wake up in the middle of the night and I started to feel a weird impulse to like get on the floor and stretch or something like that. That then led to me actually moving in these incredibly weird ways that I would sometimes, I can remember one particular time waking up in the middle of the night and taking my hands like this. Now, I was not thinking this. And I started pushing away like this. And then the next thing you know, I started going like, no, no, no. I'm kind of doing this like quietly. I'm whispering. So my husband's sleeping a bit. I'm just like, but I don't know what it was connected to. But I know I shifted things by doing that, And so sometimes I think it's also getting out of our heads and into our bodies and just trusting, like, what does our body need right now? And if your body wants to do something really weird, trust it. It's okay. Go into another room, close the door. And if it's that you're going to, I don't know. I don't actually know, but whatever it is, it comes up for us, because I think it's a lot of stagnant stuff and I think we have to move it. So that's another aspect of it that I would just invite people to bring into their repertoire of things.
Yeah, that's a good point that you bring in, because I've been doing a lot of reading and research lately on the polyvagal theory, and Stephen Porges is, if I said that correctly, the one who kind of is the pioneer of the polyvagal theory. He said one of the best things for self-regulating or down-regulating the sympathetic nervous system is to do yoga. And that's just movement for the body. There's many other somatic type of things, but he recommends yoga as a way of just down-regulating your body. So, and that's movement too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can't forget we're in this body, and this body is part of our experience, and somatic healing, body work, whatever. I feel very strongly, I've experienced it myself, is a huge part of healing, because it's in our tissue, it's in our DNA, and not just the life we're living now with epigenetics. We understand we are carrying trauma from previous generations.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it is within us, whether we personally experienced it or not. It doesn't matter. If our great grandmother experienced it, famine, enslavement, whatever, anything, it's in us.
So that's my question though, then, Tia, is just that, like, when I'm not sure and I'm feeling something in my body, I'm going back, I know I'm repeating the question, and maybe we don't have a clear-cut answer today, but is
another podcast
perhaps, but is it, a lot of what I feel or in my body, is it this generational stuff? And does it take a lifetime of feeling it? And that's what I'm tapping into when I feel certain things. And or is it coming from my thoughts? I really think more of it is in my body. And I'm really just a lot, like, if we put aside our coping strategies and we're able to put them down and we allow this to bubble up to the surface and heal it, there are layers and layers and layers of it. And does it take a lifetime because of all the generations that we're healing, past generations?
Well, I think it's Resma, and I'm blanking on his last name. He does a lot of somatic healing work, particularly around racism as well. And then Angel Kyoto, who wrote Radical Dharma, they feel, and this was a race conversation, a racism conversation, that it may take up to 7 generations if we go at the rate we are going at today. They predict, based on whatever. I won't go into all that. 7 generations to heal enslavement and all of the systemic aspects of that. So that's one aspect. So if we have 2 or 3, 4, 5 generations within us, it could take 7 generations. Or, as they stated in this conversation, if more people do the work we are discussing, it will go faster.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was at the rate it's happening today, but I feel more and more people are open to this, and it will accelerate. So we're going to heal what we are able to in this lifetime, and then our children will do the same, and maybe our great grandchildren will have a different experience. We don't know.
Yeah.
But we can't be attached to that either.
Right.
Yeah. And some people would say that, like, so that if I heal it, and I really believe this, I see it in my kids, that if I heal it, it kind of like cleans it up in the lineage.
Yes.
And so, theoretically, we have a lot to clean up because people haven't been doing that cleanup.
Right.
And so hopefully then, future generations have maybe, they still may be cleaning up the same amount of things, but it's fewer that they are impacted by.
Mm-hmm.
But I really believe that I do think nervous system healing work. I've actually been, my teacher has been Irene Lyon, who is a student of Stephen Porges and others that out there in the world of nervous system healing. And I think nervous system healing work is really important. I think movement. I also think that, taking the pressure off, again, that we need to get anywhere, and just being with and not judging that, like, because we don't know. I still even believe when you're on a thought train that it's like, I mean, again, who is anyone to say that that's not what you needed in that moment? I just don't know. I just don't know anymore. I've been humbled by people's healing experiences, not feel so clear on it. And I just want to, since we're talking about triggers today, I want to say one thing about it, which is that I was a little bit more harsh about triggers when I first learned, and I kind of had this thing of, like, face your triggers at all costs, kind of like just face them. And, but the more emotionally tapped in I've become, the more I also realize that a person also really has to trust themselves on when it's too much for them. Yes. And there can be people in your life or environments in your life that actually are too triggering for that point in your journey. It may be too triggering for this entire lifetime. Right. It might be. And it's okay to actually even say, this one I'm just not up for yet. I'm not up for dealing with this one. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the challenges is when we can easily get swept away by just wanting to avoid facing any of them. So I caution people to not just create an insulated, protected life where you never, ever have to be exposed to anyone. That I really caution people on that. Yeah. But on the other side, I definitely think that we need to give people permission that says that if there's a person, circumstance, situation in your life where it's triggering you, it's okay to walk away. Mm-hmm. It's okay to say, you know what? I cannot let you treat me this way, or I cannot be exposed where I keep feeling this way and it's unresolved in me. I'm not denying that, but I can't do it. Too much. There are times it's too much, and we have to set boundaries, and we have to say, sometimes I just can't do this thing. And sometimes it can even be around things that we really feel an obligation around, and we know we're going to let people down, and those people are going to judge us. And they're going to say we're like bad daughters, or we're bad this, or we're bad this, and we should be doing it better. And I think there's a time when we have to take care of ourselves, and we have to know that it's not serving anyone for us to be that way. It's not even serving that person who thinks they want us in their life. It's not, sometimes it's like, and often it can be our sticking around that enables their behavior.
Yep.
And sometimes when we walk away and we say, I can't do this anymore, you know, and granted, I have to do my own inner work, but I can't do it anymore. It's the catalyst for both people to be able to actually change. Sometimes you have to get away from a situation to be able to have some distance, to be able to actually look inside, because you're just so caught up in it. So I just like to give people permission. As much as I'm a fan and I love to say triggers are great, I also recognize that it's something that we have to find that balance. You said it, Kim. It's that balance in everything we're doing.
So I'm just gonna like bring us kind of to a close and say, there's my permission slip, Tia, to run away. Because I was telling Tia I wanted to run and bolt from all of my responsibilities because I'm too triggered. And Deb, you just gave me permission. I'm out of here. I'm done with this. I'm packing my bag. I'm going to a mountain somewhere.
She's in the flee mode.
I'm fleeing.
I get it.
I'm just
I
teasing.
get it.
But it does help that you said that, because it does give a sense of comfort. You know, it's like, okay, you know, it's okay.
Well,
So,
and there might be some part of you, something that you might want to take a look at.
Yeah.
That's like, just where are you doing too much?
Yeah.
Like, where can you pull it back? Because maybe there's some coping strategy you might have of like, oh, I have to do it all. And maybe and I'm not saying you do, I don't know that about you, but like, and so then you dial it back and you say, you know, listen, I can do this, but I can't do that anymore. Right. And sometimes that's just enough to give us a little breathing space.
Yeah.
Because I mean, come on, we are limited, as I know we are limitless, but we are limited as in our human bodies and based on our own capacity. Right. And I feel like, you know, we're increasing capacity by doing this work, but we don't always have the capacity we wish we had to handle everything.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. So this has been awesome and amazing conversation. Is there anything that you want to say, conclude, or add on the topic of triggers before we ask you a couple of fun questions?
No, just what I've kind of said. I'll just repeat, not to be afraid of triggers and to realize that triggers really are just information, just like feelings are information. Everything's information. There's no need to be afraid, and to get support if you feel like you want to dive into triggers, but you're not really sure how to do it in a safe way that feels, you know, because it's so easy to think the trigger is the person. You know, and Tia, you know, the quote was very clear. You know, the triggers, it's just a messenger,
right?
And the person's just a messenger that, you know, that triggered you, and that doesn't mean that there isn't something to be dealt with. That's, I think, the most important thing. Right. When you're triggered, it is your responsibility to explore your reaction, but that's very different than blame, for one, and it doesn't mean that the other person doesn't have a responsibility for something. There might be something you need to go back and say to that person, hey, when that happened, this wasn't okay, or I didn't understand what was going on there, or I don't like that, or no. But I encourage people to first come back, explore the trigger within, get support, get clear eyes, so that you actually ask for the thing you really need, or you say the thing that really needs to be said rather than the thing that's based on our wounding.
Exactly.
And we can actually we begin to shift relationships. That's where, you know, Tia, where you said that like this is a collective thing. This is all of us in it together in a community. That's part of the work, though, is going back to another person so that they understand how they've impacted you, and to be able to create permission for us to ask for what we need. Right. Doesn't mean the other person has to give it to us, but we do need to create space and permission for asking. So I feel like it's like I feel like that's an important thing to remember, that this isn't about you go in and you do your trigger work and then you never ask for anything ever again, because everything's you, it's always you. And that's also another way we can bypass, because what we do is we avoid the conflict, right? By like, well, I'll just deal with it inside.
It's all me.
Believe me, I went through that phase too, where I was like, oh, good, I'll never have to deal with conflict again.
If only.
Conflict avoider mask. We did that one. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So good.
We could talk about this
Yeah.
one for hours.
I know.
Honestly, I could just keep
Definitely.
asking more questions for sure.
Yeah.
But you want to do, oh, go ahead, Tia. You want to
Yeah.
say something?
Oh no, we just have to have another conversation. That's all.
I love it.
That's all.
I
Yeah.
love it.
It's just more opportunity.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we end with 5 quick questions.
Hmm.
So what's the most prominent mask you wear?
Oh. Probably the mask of having it all together.
Mm,
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yep.
All right. So if you could go anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
Hmm. Do I have to worry about COVID?
Nope.
No.
We're pretending COVID is not. This is our fantasy we're living in right now.
Well, you know where I think I would go right now is Sedona. I just love Sedona, Arizona, because I'm so grounded. It allows me to be up a little bit more. Yeah, and Tia, you know, because I said that. Like,
You did.
will you go to Sedona with me?
Months, fall, possibly. Woo.
Do it.
Planning.
I know.
What's your favorite way to take care of yourself, to love yourself?
It changes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, depends on where I am in my life right now. My favorite thing to do in the whole world is to go on my front porch. I have a swing. I sit in the swing with nothing. I used to bring, you know, a meditation or a journal, and I find I bring them and then I put them down and I don't use them and I just sit there quietly and I
Love
just
it.
enjoy nature.
Love it.
Yep.
If you have a bucket list, what's the top of
Hmm.
that bucket list?
Gosh, I don't really have a bucket list. I can't believe I don't have a bucket list. I need a bucket list. I don't have one. I'm just, okay, let's just see if anything comes up. Let me just check in. So I don't really have a bucket list, but I broke my hip, as you know, in January, and I'm now pretty much back to like normal, except for I'm just not strong enough yet.
Yep.
So this year I had originally planned to be able to ride my bike up to the top of Mount Tam. But then when I broke my hip, I didn't think that was going to be achievable.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm going to own it right now that I want to be able to ride by the end of this year to the top of Mount Tam.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Love it. You heard it here, everyone.
Yes.
Okay, and the last question. What's one of the books that changed your life?
You should see how many books I have.
I know, it's a tough one.
Maybe the one that just came up was Homecoming by John Bradshaw. That's the one that came up, and it's about inner child healing.
I haven't read that one. I'm writing it down right now.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one.
All right.
Yeah.
That's why I love this question.
Yeah, it's always good. Yeah.
Just add to the pile.
As if you need another one.
We always do, right?
You can have another book that you can put in the pile that you won't read for who knows how long.
But eventually it will get read.
Eventually. Yes.
All right. This has been amazing.
So
Kim, won't you?
It has been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of our podcast. So if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how can they contact you?
I think the best way is probably just to go to my website, which is my name, debblum.com. And then, you know, everything's there, my social media. And then, you know, if you wanted to ever have a consultation, or I have a paid membership group also called Self-Love Base Camp. So if someone wants to join that as well.
And you have
also,
I was going to say,
you have and a freebie, but you also have a YouTube channel as well.
I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Yep.
And a podcast on parenting.
Awesome. And so your free gift offering for listeners is?
Oh, so it's called the Trigger Trail Buddy. I do. My theme is all similar to you too. It's around, you know, like hiking and mountains and things like that. So the Trigger Trail Buddy is actually a guide that you go through, and it takes, when you've been triggered afterwards, you go through this and it goes in and identifies the needs and perceptions and feelings, and then guides you through a process to actually integrate whatever pieces that you found. And I now have, like a few days after you get it, I now send a meditation with it too, so that you can go through the third page of the journal in a meditation as well. So it's really cool. And it's a great way to get exposed to this, or even if you do it, but you just want a more formal process, it's pretty cool.
Oh, that's fantastic. And all of this information will be available in our show notes as well, so people can find it easily. Oh my goodness. Thank you so, so much. Any last words from either of you before we close out?
No, just a big thank you for what you do, but also for having me here. It's been super fun. I love it. You make it so inviting for your guests. So
thank you. It was
Thank
awesome.
you so much. Oh,
Yeah.
so much amazing goodness in here. And be sure to go grab that Trailhead freebie.
Yes.
I'm going to go grab it.
Yeah, let's do this again too. We'll do that, come back together again. All right, everybody, have a great day. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for supporting us and for just being such a great audience. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.